Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So tonight's talk is about the problem with the self. And I apologise for not guiding you before, I forgot. But I think silence is probably the best guidance anyway, so yeah, I gave you some good guidance. So tonight, rather than me giving you a big download of information like I did last time, I thought I'd begin it by asking you to reflect on whether you ever have problems with the self. Where does your self give you troubles? Just for a few moments. Just think about that, if you ever have a problem with the self. And if you do, what do you do to work with it? How do you alleviate the dukkha associated with the self? So, does anybody ever have a problem with the self? I can see you all. Has everyone nodded? Okay. I do. I have a problem with myself. And so I thought I'd like to share with you how I work with it. First of all, I'd like to share with you a little bit about what it is we call the self in the first place, and then how we can work with the suffering that we have with the self. So in Buddhism, the self is considered as 5 groups of experiences, 5 aggregates of experience. These aggregates are like clusters of experiences, and it begins with rupa, or form. Form is the body, basically. The experiences of earth element, fire element, water element, and air element. Earth element is the experiences of hardness, softness, solidity, heaviness. These experiences we have in our body. Fire element are the experiences of coolness, or warmth, or heat, or cold, the temperature of this experience. Water element is related to cohesion, or slipperiness, or stickiness, or dryness, those experiences of water. Like if you move your tongue around in your mouth, you might feel a slipperiness. That's water element. That's it's the fluidity of something. And air element is the experience of movement. Like if I move my arm up like that, there's a shift. There's a movement of experience. It's like wind, and sometimes we can feel movement as we move our body, but also we can feel movement in our body. And people talk about wind in their body. So that's all part of the body. That's form, or rupa. The next experience is called Vedana. So 5 experiences: forms, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. is what is made up of these 5 groups of experience, which are called khandha in Pali or skandha in Sanskrit. So form is what I described. Feelings is Vedana. And Vedana is this affective and hedonic qualities of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neither. And basically that's it. It's like when I see you looking at me and smiling, I feel there's a pleasant feeling, and that's arising from mind. When I have a nice piece of chocolate, as long as I'm not beating myself up about it, it's a pleasant experience, and it comes from body. So Vedana is these experiences of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neither. The next khandha is sanya. Form, feelings, perceptions. Sanya are perceptions. And they're also called memory sometimes, just like recognizing something. Like you might look at the screen and see a shadow of someone, and then you put your glasses on and you recognize, oh, that's Ellen, or that's Matt. There's a recognition of what that form was. That moment of recognition is what sanya is, or what perceptions are. The next one, form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations. They're called sankhara in Pali, and that is volitional activity. It's mental activity. It's what we create things with. It's all that thinking that goes on, the thing that dominates our mind most of the time. Like sankhara, blah, 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 blah. We're constantly creating something. We're creating things with our thoughts, for example. That's sankhara. And the final aspect of these 5 khandha, form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Vijnana in Pali. Consciousness, there's tomes written about consciousness, but at its most basic and simple level, it is the knowing of experience, that aspect of knowingness that we have. It's the experience of, it's what is conscious of experience. We usually relate to that as being at the core of ourselves, but according to Buddhism, consciousness, as well as the other four khandhas, the form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, they are all impermanent. They are also not self, meaning there's nothing solid that can be found within it all. They're changing and dynamic. They're also dukkha. They're also dukkha. These 5 clumps of experience, these 5 aggregates, are subject to impermanence. The nature is empty of thingness, and they are also unable to satisfy. They are essentially dukkha. So I remember a couple of weeks ago I was talking to you, I gave you a big download of information, and there was one point I mentioned that the dukkha that the Buddha had a kind of a phrase or a saying. You find this repeated in the suttas, and in the first sutta, the Buddha talked about what dukkha was, and he said, a range of things from the gross right down to the subtle. Now, the subtlemost aspect of dukkha, you may remember this, but I'll tell you anyway. The subtlemost aspect of dukkha is clinging to the 5 aggregates as a self, pulling them in and holding them together and creating an illusion of a solid, lasting entity with these 5 khandhas, which are in fact all impermanent, empty of thingness, and subject to unsatisfactoriness. So when we talk about the problem with the self, essentially we're talking about the clinging of these 5 khandha coming together, we hold them together and we believe they are me. We believe that this is what I am. And as far as the 5 khandha go separately, the first khandha, rupa or form, is about where I am. This is where I am in the body. The second khandha, feelings or vedana, is about how I am. How do I feel? I feel good, I feel bad, I'm not sure how I feel. That's the second one. The third one, perceptions or sanya, is about what I am. So I perceive, I recognize something as myself. The fourth one, being sankhara or volitions or mental formations, is about why I am. Why I am. It's like the thinking about it, this creation of concepts and views and ideas and so on. And the last one, vijnana or consciousness, is about wherefore I am, I think. I think that's the way it was. I was reading this before and Analaya said it really well. Wherefore I am. Whereby I am. So these 5 khandhas are represented by I'll say this again. These 5 khandhas make this illusion of a self. We bring them together and we hold on to them. We believe them to be permanent. We believe them to be an identity. We take them on as I am. So maybe you can see a bit of a problem in that already. I mean, I know that a lot of people talk about ego, and I know there's a lot of definitions of ego, but it's sort of like believing the ego as we are. Now, I just want to talk to you a little bit more about how, the many ways the self can cause a problem for ourselves. Well, for ourselves. The self causes a problem for itself. And this is through understanding the 10 fetters. I remember a couple of years ago I gave a talk at the Kuan Yin Center about the 10 fetters. The fetters are things that hold us back from progress. Now, I won't go through all the details of the fetters, but I'm going to be talking about 2 of those fetters to give you an idea of how the self causes us a problem. Well, belief in the self. Actually, it's the belief in the self that's the problem. In and of itself, it's quite functional. We need a self to function in the world. I have a lot of concepts about myself, for example. I'm a psychologist, I'm a dad, I'm a granddad, I'm a partner, I'm a friend, I'm all sorts of things. I use these ideas, these concepts, as a way of functioning in the world, like operating in the world. The problem with it is when I believe that I am those things, when they change, I suffer. When they're subject to decay, I suffer. So coming back to these 10 fetters, one of the fetters is called a personality belief. Now, a personality view, sorry. This view is clinging to the belief that we are our personalities. It's fusing with the concept that a personality is a solid, lasting thing, independent and separate from a context. It's this belief that I am my concept. Like I said before, I have a lot of concepts about myself. I believe I'm a dad, I'm a psychologist, and so on and so forth. These are useful concepts to use in the world, but when I believe them to be true, to be solid, lasting, an entity, then it's a problem. So, a couple of weeks ago, I gave a talk, and after the talk, I recorded the talk, I gave it to you guys. It was about coronavirus and the Four Noble Truths. And I gave the talk and I recorded it. And then on the weekend when I had some time, I started looking at it. I edited it. And I was looking at this and I was going, whoa, wow. I'm making so many mistakes. I'm saying ums about 1,000 times, and I'm losing words. I can't find the right words to describe what I mean. I'm getting all entangled in things. And I was looking at myself on the screen, editing things. I was taking things out that I didn't want. And I sort of gave up because I realized that it wasn't a worthwhile talk, as far as my opinion was. And I noticed that I had a lot of suffering because I have this idea that perhaps I'm a good Dharma teacher. I have this concept that I'm a good Dharma teacher. I'm clear and I present well, or something like that. And here I am looking at this Dharma talk that's kind of all over the place. It's kind of like a download of too much information. It wasn't clear. It was scattered. And even my loving partner told me, well, her honest evaluation, or frank evaluation, which I always value, said something like, it wasn't a good Dharma talk, Malcolm. You're a bit all over the place. And when I spoke to someone else, and I won't name her, they said, it wasn't your best Dharma talk, Malcolm. Now, so the point I'm making was that I cling to a self-concept. I cling to a concept about myself. I think that I'm a good Dharma teacher. And I create this self, or this identity, out of a thought. I fuse with it, I become it, and then when I see it's not like that, I suffer. When I cling to that idea, I suffer. So that's just one. I'm giving you a personal example of how the self can be a problem. And another fetter that we find in these 10 fetters is something called conceit. Concepts, self-concepts. The first fetter is personality view. We have a personality. We have, oh, that's Malcolm. He's like this, and so on and so forth. And I cling to it. We believe it as to be something solid and lasting. Concepts, or conceit, is about believing I am something. And it comes from it. The way they say it in Pali is mana. Mana. That's the way we translate conceit in Pali. And mana literally means to measure against something. So what we're doing when we're conceiting, or we're believing the concepts about ourselves, is that we are making a measure of ourselves, this concept of ourselves, against something else. We can have a conceit against someone else. We're measuring ourselves against someone else, for example. We're either better or worse or the same as someone else. Or we're measuring ourselves against ourselves. Like, a couple of months ago, I gave a good talk. I was, a good Dharma teacher then. And 3 weeks ago, I was a bad Dharma teacher because I wasn't giving a good talk. I'm measuring myself against something. This whole idea of self-esteem, for example, is about the variation between the discrepancy between an ideal self and an actual self. The greater the discrepancy between the actual self and an ideal self, the more you have low self-esteem. When the ideal self and the actual self is on par, is equal, then your self-esteem is pretty good. So this whole idea about having an ideal self, for example, and not living up to it, is a lot of suffering. So, coming back to the suffering with conceit, you can see that we often compare ourselves to other people, or other things, or other times. And when I was listening to that talk, and I watched myself on the screen, I thought, wow, I have such bad word finding difficulties. I can't find the right words. And Tara Brach gives a much better Dharma talk than I give a Dharma talk. I mean, she's really clear and she's smooth and she uses words that are appropriate, you know. And so I'm comparing myself and I'm causing a lot of suffering because I'm not living up to what I think I should be. So, how can we work with it? How can we deal with this? How can we basically get to the core of this, the underlying issue around this is that we believe this concept of the self, or this idea of the self, these 5 khandhas, to be a solid, lasting thing. We're not seeing the impermanence, we're not seeing the dukkha, we're not seeing the not-self nature of these experiences. So when we don't see that, we have suffering. When we can see that, we can see also that we have freedom. So one way I understand to work with this is by practicing mindfulness. And you all know, you've probably heard about mindfulness, I imagine. But we all know that mindfulness, there's a lot of different ways of understanding mindfulness. And one way I understand mindfulness is remembering to bring attention to immediate experience with care and discernment. So we have this understanding that mindfulness is about being attentive to experience. And the Buddha, in the Buddhist discourse called the Satipatthana Sutta, he talked about 4 foundations of mindfulness, 4 areas that we are mindful with. And of course, mindfulness relates to monitoring and tracking internal experience, external experience, and the dynamic between internal and external experiences. So with these 4 foundations of mindfulness, we're tracking and we're seeing along with body, feelings, mind or consciousness, and phenomena. So the 4 foundations of mindfulness are body, that's the first foundation. The second foundation is feelings. The third foundation is citta nupassana satipatthana, which means tracking and seeing along with mind. And I won't go into great descriptions about all of these foundations, but the 4th foundation is called Dhamma nupassana satipatthana. Dhamma, it means mindfulness of dhammas. It means seeing along with dhammas. Now, it's not mindfulness of the Dhamma, although, you know, we can be mindful of the Dhamma. It is mindfulness of dhammas. Dhamma, a Dhamma, is a unit of experience. And in this particular foundation of mindfulness called dhammas, it's also called phenomena in English. We have 5 subdomains. One subdomain is being tracking and being mindful of the hindrances. The second, another one, is being attentive to 6 sense spheres like sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and so on. Another one is being mindful and tracking the 7 factors of awakening. Another one is being mindful of and tracking the experience of the khandhas, the 5 khandhas. So what we do with this particular foundation of mindfulness, and the last subdomain, by the way, is being aware of the 4 truths, the 4 noble truths. So with this foundation of tracking and being familiar with the 5 khandha, we're looking at the khandha as discrete experiences, and we're seeing the impermanence of them. We're seeing the way they arise and pass away. When we see how they arise and pass away, we also see the emptiness of them. When we see the emptiness of them, we also see the unreliability of them, the unsatisfactory nature of them, and with that insight, we let go of clinging to them. It's like looking at ourselves. We look at ourselves and we see it for ourself for what it is. And when we can see it for what it is, there's a natural release of the gripping. Just like, I think I've made this analogy before, just like if we're holding onto a hot potato, we're holding tightly onto it and it's burning our hands. When we realise that it's burning our hands, we naturally, reflexively release it. It's like that. So when you can bring attention to your experience, to when you know what you're looking for these particular aspects of khandhas, like you can be aware of your body, you can be aware of feelings, you can be aware of perceptions, you're noticing them, you're seeing them arise and pass away, you're being aware of mental formations rather than getting caught up in them and believing their story, rather than fusing with them and identifying with them and believing them to be true. You're seeing them as just mental formations, just thoughts, for example, not statements of fact. They're just thoughts, they're just mental events. And then also you're seeing consciousness for what it is. There's an analogy for consciousness, because that's probably the hardest one to see as not necessarily who and what we are, because we believe that somewhere inside there is me, you know. And if you could say, oh, well, I'm not my body, I'm not mental formations, and I'm not feelings and so on. But it's hard to say I'm not consciousness, because there's a feeling that we're here. But with discernment, we can see that consciousness is also impermanent, is also empty of thingness, and is also dukkha, if we cling to it. So that's one way. And I want to emphasize, I want to come back to that definition of mindfulness, because in this process it's really important to be kind to oneself. Because it's very easy to start to get caught up in aversion or high self-criticism. Like when I was watching my video and, you know, the video of myself thinking, I was being critical of myself basically. I was editing the words out and basically I was just editing me out. I was being highly self-critical. I noticed that criticism coming up, and I remembered, hold on a minute, that's a cause of suffering. So how can we work with this? Of course, we have compassion with this. So coming back to that definition of mindfulness. The definition of mindfulness is related to, I'll say it again, remembering to be attentive to immediate experience with care and discernment. So immediately you know that mindfulness is defined by its context. And here is within the context of the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Coming back to right intention. Right intention includes intentions of goodwill, intentions of kindness, intentions of care, intentions of warm friendliness. So when you practice mindfulness, it has to be done, well, it's useful if it's done in a way that is in accord with right mindfulness, which is one of having good intentions. So when you're monitoring these experiences, you're monitoring them and you're tracking them with a sense of kindness and care, a gentleness and a softness. So you don't identify with them and you don't feed into high self-criticism. So I'll just finish it up with one way I do this. One practice that I do that I find it really brings the five khandha to the fore for me to see clearly. And this practice is contemplating death. I practice that. I like to practice that every day. The practice of recollecting death. a death recollection. And one way I do it is by thinking that every breath could be my last breath. This breath that I'm taking right now may be my last breath. If it is my last breath, what should I do now? And I ask myself the question, what is it that is dying? What is it that is dying? Breathing in, breathing out, last breath. What is it that's dying? What is it? And I have all these images and concepts and, my life. And it's all within one of the khandhas. It's just changing phenomena. I can see that when I ask myself, what dies or who dies, there's nothing that I can find that is solid and lasting. And I'm reminded of my teacher in Thailand. He always used to ask me, where is it? Where is this person who is suffering? Where is this person who is doing this? Look and see. Tell me when you can find it. And you can never find it. You look inside, you try to find this self that we think is so precious and identify with. And we can never find it. This, the analogy of consciousness and being mindful of consciousness is like, I think there's an analogy for a plantain tree, I think it is. So it's like you cut into a plantain tree and you peel it off. It's like an onion. You can't get to anything. There's no center. It's just layers and layers of something. But there's no center to it. And consciousness is like that. So the self, when you look inside and outside, you look wherever, you can't find it. So I think that's enough for tonight's talk. Let's have some discussion.